They called themselves the Lincoln League. Operating deep within the heart of the Confederacy, this loose network of slaves and free blacks spied for the North. And the group, which is little known today, went by the full name of the Lincoln Legal Loyal League, and they spied right under the noses of their Southern masters. The group is also the subject of my historical novel, The Lincoln League, and the main characters are John and Peg Scoble. They're former slaves that were freed right before the start of the Civil War. John Scoble is a real person from history. He was the first African-American spy for the U.S. Intelligence Service during the Civil War. And while he went north to become a spy, his wife remained in Richmond. That's all we know about her. We don't know anything else, not even her name, although I call her Peg in the novel. And I always like to have strong female characters in my novels, so I decided to create a parallel fictional storyline for Peg, while I also followed John's adventures as well. Now, Peg's story may be fictional, but I anchored it in the real espionage that was taking place in and around Richmond during the Civil War. So, in the Lincoln League, I connected her to various true-life spies in Richmond, including the most famous Richmond spy of all, Elizabeth Van Lew.
They said I was a spy. But I don't know how they could call me a spy when I was just serving my country within its recognized borders. A country for which I was willing to lay down my life. Is that honorable or honest? God knows. They also said I was crazy. Crazy Bet, some called me. Well, once you hear my story, you can decide for yourself if you think I was crazy or not. My name is Elizabeth Van Lew, and I lived in Richmond, Virginia, the very heart of the Confederate States of America. Oh, before the war, some of the most elite families of Richmond's high society were entertained in our home. The Adamses, the Lees. Edgar Allan Poe quoted The Raven in our parlor, and the voice of the famous Swedish opera star Jenny Lind filled its halls. And yet I lived during some of the most tumultuous times of our young nation, during the war between the states, or as my fellow citizens in the South like to call it, the war of northern aggression. Northerners fought Southerners and brothers fought brothers. It tore our nation apart. Oh, I lived in the South, but my sympathies were for the North. The Federals, they were called, or the Union. Some people blame my northern sympathies on the fact that my family was originally from the North. But I was born in Richmond, Virginia on October 15th, 1818, the oldest of 3 children, and to my dying day, I will proudly claim my identity as a Virginian. Some Richmonders insisted it was my schooling in Philadelphia that changed me into a Union sympathizer. They claimed I had imbibed abolitionism under the influence of teachers who had decried the injustice of slavery. But the fertile soil had already been prepared by an encounter I had with a young girl in Hot Springs. Hot Springs was a resort town in the western mountains of Virginia where my prosperous family frequently vacationed. As I lounged in the warm mineral waters, this young white girl told me a story that would change my life. She said she was the daughter of a slave trader. Her father had slaves, as did we. Of course we did. I never questioned the system of American slavery that was present at my very birth. Well, this slave trader's daughter said that her father needed some money, so he decided to sell one of his young slave mothers and her baby. This girl said that that baby was effortlessly glued to that mother's hip. That mother could do any kind of manual labor with that baby plastered to her side. Well, on the auction block, the mother was sold to one master, and the baby was sold to a different master. They had to practically pry that baby off that mother's hip to get them powdered. And once they did, that mother, she just dropped dead. That is exactly what that girl told me. It was as if that mother and baby had one heart, and when they tore them apart, that mother's heart broke, and she fell dead right there on the auction block. That story haunted me for years. So when I went to school in Philadelphia, and the seeds of abolitionism dropped into the fertile soil of my soul where that story lay, it quickly germinated and sprouted, seeking the air and the light that would define the fruit of my life's labors. Slave power crushes freedom of speech and opinion. Slave power degrades labor. Slave power is arrogant, it's intrusive, jealous, cruel, despotic, not only over the slave, but over the community, the state. So years later, when my father died, I knew what we had to do. We had to free our 9 slaves if I was ever going to rest peacefully in my grave. My relationship with my mother, it strengthened. And I found support from her in my abolitionist activities. We not only freed all our slaves, but when I found out that family members were being sold by other masters, well, I purchased them, and I set them free as well. I suppose I was always trying to reunite that poor dead mother with her precious baby.
Yeah, we have time for questions. One thing I do like to say, though, before we start the questions, is that a lot of people, since I write novels and I write the books that some of these characters appear in, they assume that I write the drama as well. And Jenny writes the narrative, based a lot on the actual memoir of Elizabeth Van Lew. But Jenny is the one who pulls that together. So let's give her another hand for writing it as well. So, any questions, either for Jenny, myself, about Elizabeth Van Lew, about this crazy box up here? So
just raise your hand and I'll give you a mic.
Raise your hand if you got any questions. Right there.
Hang on, Ted.
Yeah, how did you hide your exploits from your sisters? I mean, did your sisters know that, were they part of the...
she never mentions her sisters in the memoirs.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not mentioned anywhere.
I've thought about that myself. I could never find anything about it.
That'd be a tough, kind of hard to...
Well, and I, unlike Doug, who does add some fiction to his things, the monologues that I write, I want them to be all factual, so I won't add anything that I don't know. And indeed, I take both of the things that we've done, I take it from the memoirs and try to find the voice of the characters in those memoirs, and then I will embellish maybe the language or describing the situation, but I won't make up any information or situations that haven't really occurred.
So their actual feelings, it remains a mystery?
The sisters I don't know anything about. Yeah. I mean, when you read about this woman and also what people have said about her, I mean, what do you think? Do you think she was crazy? I mean, she was eccentric, wasn't she? I mean, that's what I got when I looked out. After I had absorbed all this information, I thought, well, she had to be eccentric for people to have believed that so much about her. On the other hand, she was extremely principled and very intelligent and courageous.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do believe it was more of a facade, this craziness, to help as a cover for what she was doing. So, but it is interesting about her sisters. I'll have to check on it. With her being more of a minor character in my novel, I don't know her story backwards and forwards, mainly through what we've done here. So, but that's something I do need to check on. But I don't think they ever mention a sister. It's usually the mother and Elizabeth who really became very close later in life, and they did butt up against the father, who
We could imagine what happened to the sisters, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I got a question up here.
What about the niece when after you died? What happened with the niece? Do you know? Did she remain in the house, or?
I think so. The house was torn down, so
Yeah.
she in the early part of the 1900s. So if she did live there, with that story that I mentioned that she claimed that to remember Mary Bowser, that was about 1910, and I think the house was torn down shortly after that. So I think she did continue to live in the
She was
house
still
for some time.
around.
For some time,
Nothing
but
else.
exactly when she moved out, I'm not sure. We got another question there?
Thanks, Ray. What happened to Mary Bowser?
Yeah, now that's very controversial about how much some people claim that there really wasn't a spy. Verena Davis denied it, but I think most people do think there was a spy. And there was also confusion about her name because she married another guy who by the name of Bowser. There was another Mary that they referenced, and I think it was just her change of names. But there were several Marys floating around, and they were. In reading I do remember that because Mary Bowser actually is a more prominent figure in my novel. So I do remember there was a lot more controversy over did she exist, or was she this woman, was she that woman? But I think people do believe there was a Mary Bowser, and she did spy in Jefferson Davis's house. So what happened to her after that? A lot of these characters just sort of vanish into history. Nobody hears about them again. They weren't even sure. I think most people thought that was a photo, but then they started more recently questioning whether that really was a photo of Mary Bowser. So there's just so much mystery about these people, especially African Americans, who maybe didn't have as many records about them. Like John Scoble, who is the hero of the Lincoln League. We really know very little about him. All the stories about him are contained in a book written by Alan Pinkerton. If you remember Pinkerton Detectives, well, he was the head of the intelligence service for the Union in the first year, so he hired John. And so John, so there's quite a few stories during this 1 year period, and he vanishes. So nobody really knows what happened. A lot of the records of the spy intelligence records were destroyed after the war, either intentionally or in fires. So a lot of the records were gone too. So a lot of these people are just sort of mysteriously disappeared in history. And we got a question up front.
Just a minute, Don.
Was there ever a time when you were suspected what you were doing, that they questioned you, or you were under suspicion?
Let me try to.
Yeah, were you actually ever suspected? Which, I think that guard
Oh,
did
yeah.
suspect.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, she was suspected.
But not enough that they never took action against you during the war. So it wasn't enough.
I think the fact that she came from such a wealthy, prestigious family was in her favor. When she would want to help, it was like, oh, you're too wealthy. A woman like you shouldn't be interacting with those kind of people. And so I think that worked in her favor. And the whole, how much it was that they thought that they couldn't really accurately say if she was spying because she was so unpredictable and looked like she was doing everything right and, bringing the meals in and everything, and they would test it, and, she would, at least...
I think more of the resentment was just that it was very obvious where her sympathies lay. The spying was she did it enough covertly that they never really could, like you said, never really could pin anything on her. But she did get a lot of pressure just because they knew it was very obvious where her sympathies lay. And that's where most of the pressure came, was on over that. It wasn't until after the war they really get the idea of what she was up to.
And, it was probably in her favor in terms of being a successful spy that they relegated the things that she was doing to an imbalance, as opposed to the fact that she really would be able to do something like that.
And I think
It was
that,
a complicated personality.
and the fact that she was a female, I think that's why a lot of, and I've done, got quite a few resource books on Civil War spies, but, a couple books devoted entirely to female spies. And there are a lot of, some of the most prominent ones, in fact, probably the majority of the prominent ones, I think, were more female spies because they weren't, people didn't suspect them as much. And same with the African American, with the slaves, they didn't suspect that they'd be capable of spying. So, with the exception of people like Timothy Webster, plays a big role in the Lincoln League too, and he was a very prominent Union spy in the first year. John Scoble actually served as his servant, at least that was his cover. He was Timothy Webster's servant. But beyond that, there were quite a few female spies.
Well, and
on both sides.
Don't you also wonder? I mean, when she said, "I know you and you and you and you," I screamed at them. Those were her words. So I scream it because that's what she would have done. My guess is that back then, not too many people were outside screaming at people on their porch, right? So that again may be one reason why people were like, okay, let's just stay away from her. I mean, there were just so many different reasons why she was able to be successful in this. And then, of course, once it was known, I mean, she died a pauper. She didn't get a headstone until later, and
as you see in this clipping here, from friends in Boston were the ones who provided the memorial stone. It was actually, again, like she said, the family of related to Paul Revere.
And I just came back from Boston. I have a son in Boston, and I went to Paul Revere's grave and stood there for a while trying to get the vibes.
I was wondering what were some of the, a couple of the more significant bits that you were able to give to the Union.
Again, they don't really usually get into it as far as information.
Well,
Anything specific?
The actual specific details, except troop numbers and movements,
Right.
it's rather general.
You have sent me the most valuable information received from Richmond during the war. And she says that her and her mother picked up positions and
And troop numbers and
troop
movements.
numbers,
So,
movements. So, I would assume that there were some details there that she was able to communicate that were not available very easily to anybody else.
and my sources that I use for the book, and again, I'm not, for a novelist, I don't have to dig so deep as a historian would to get to the really nitty-gritty, but just kind of reading more of the popular literature and histories on these people, they almost never report, they never seem to, the details aren't there in a lot of those old documents. Like in the Pinkerton book, he talks about John Scoble and Timothy Webster collecting information, never says what it is. So I'm thinking, okay, I need to, as a novelist, you can't just leave that unknown. So at that same time, there was some interesting spy work going on dealing with a submarine development in Richmond at the Tredegar Ironworks. So I thought, oh, wow, that's perfect. So it may not have been what they were, probably wasn't what they were spying about, but I had to have something, and that seemed pretty juicy. So, and that actually was going on in Richmond. There was a Union spy that was collecting information about the submarine development in Richmond, some of the early developments. So I had to fill in the details because they just usually don't give those details.
I'm Miss Elizabeth. First of all, I'd like to know about what age were you during this time? Were you in your early 20s?
Well, 1818, right? That she was born.
Well,
Okay.
she was born in 1818, but she became a true abolitionist when she went to school in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So she would have been in her late teens, early 20s.
When she became an abolitionist.
Abolitionist, yeah.
Okay.
But as far as the Civil War, I guess, to do the math, I'm a writer. Let's see, 1861, 1818, 1861, whatever that is. Anyone?
During this time that you're passing information and around all of these men, did you have any romance in your life?
There was one intimation that she may have almost gotten married, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think
And
might have passed away.
she never was married, but there was one piece of information in one of the memoirs. It wasn't her though. It was a historian, right, that added
I think
that
so.
stuff.
Yeah, I do remember
that said that they do believe that she had a serious romance at one point, but it never was realized.
And it might have been that he died. I think.
Yeah,
I
think it might have been that he died, but I think I don't think so. I think she'd scare men away, don't you?
And actually, once it became her sympathies during the Civil War, probably wouldn't attract
Yeah,
too many Southern men.
She was too. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Although,
Except
yeah,
she was spending it, and at the end,
yeah,
nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would have been hard to find a guy who wanted her to spend that kind of money on the North.
Was there any woman spy, either for the North or for the South, caught, convicted, executed at all?
I think so. Again, yeah, I mainly focused on Mary Bowser the most, and a little bit on Elizabeth Van Lew for the novel. Obviously, a little bit more on Elizabeth.
She was black. What I'm saying was there
right,
any
but
white?
were there any? I know there were ones caught, and it could have been Belle Boyd. She was one of the most famous Southern spies. She was a little bit of a Mata Hari type, using her charms there to get information. I think she might have been caught. I know she actually. I know there was a story where they almost caught her, and she shot a guy. I think she shot several men. But I think she did eventually get caught. But she did. A couple of men died in the process of trying to get her. Timothy Webster, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but he's not a main character in the novel. But he was really the first spy executed in the war. He was caught in the spring of 1862, and that actually is recounted how that happened, because John Scoble was posing as his servant, and so he would have been mixed in with that. But he got captured, and he was the first one. He was hung. So he was actually the first spy killed, or executed, I should say. Any other questions? These are great questions. Oh, got another one over there.
I can't remember the name right now. But there was a gal that posed as a Union soldier during the war, and then she ended up being a spy.
Oh, I didn't know she became. I do know there was several cases of women pretending. What's that?
She went to Tennessee and Kentucky and was
okay.
doing. She made up herself to look like a black woman.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Oh, okay. I knew there was several. I think there were several cases where women enlisted as a man, and I know I'd heard. Actually, I saw somebody recreating that character and telling her story, and I don't think. Yeah. So it was a different person, but I think there were several cases like that. I'm not familiar with that particular story.
I think her last name was Thompson.
Oh, okay. Okay. And actually, like I said, there is a really good book, and I kind of wish I had brought it along. And I was just looking at this past week. Again, it's a whole book devoted to female spies during the Civil War on both sides, and there's like 20, 25 stories in there. So there are quite a few that were active. And I have several others that I haven't even mentioned that show up in the Lincoln League, because we don't know a lot of information about John Scoble, and we don't know anything about his wife. So I had to kind of bring in these other stories that were real stories into the novel. Now, one thing, actually, I should mention, and if you think of other questions, just go ahead and raise your hand. But it's kind of a good lead-in when you're talking about that this one woman posed as a black woman. One of my novels, you may see on the back there, is called The Vanishing Woman, and Jenny also portrays Ellen Craft, because the way Ellen Craft, she was a slave, but her mother was a mixed-race slave, and her father was a master. So if you look at pictures of her, she looked white. And so she escaped by pretending to be a white man. And then her husband pretended to be her slave. So she couldn't pretend to be a white woman, because then she couldn't travel with a male slave, and she wouldn't be able to travel with her husband. So she posed as a white man, and it's just a remarkable true story, Ellen and William Craft. So Jenny also portrays Ellen Craft as well. And then you may be wondering about this box. I have two Underground Railroad novels, and the Vanishing Woman is the one of Ellen and William Craft. This one, the box, is about Henry Box Brown. Anybody ever heard of Henry Box Brown before? A few people have, but most haven't. He escaped in 1849 by shipping himself from Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia in a box. These are the dimensions that were recorded. So this is the size box that that he was shipped north in for 27 hours. And it was a grueling, because at one point on the steamboat, he was upside down for 4 hours. He had the box marked this side up this side up with care, but I guess some things never change. And the mail handler did not look at it, and he was upside down on the deck of the steamboat for 4 hours, and he couldn't make a sound because people could travel on the cargo deck. And so there were two men just having a conversation about a foot away from his box. So for 4 hours, he's on his head. And so it was a pretty tough situation. And again, very remarkable, very unusual escape. And so I found it was very interesting, these two companion books. So that's why I chose to feature Henry Box Brown in one novel and Ellen and William Craft in the other. And I will be at the back there afterwards here if anyone wants to look at those books or even buy them. But I should say one other thing about Henry Brown. Not only was he just stuck in the box, he had to have an excuse to be away from the factory. So he decided he needed to have an excuse to be away for a couple of days. He would injure himself. He decided to pour acid on his hand. And he wanted his friend to do it. His friend didn't have the nerve to do it, so he took the bottle and he dumped it on his hand, and he burned himself all the way down to the bone. So not only is he inside a box, but he's got a bandaged, bloody hand and in a lot of agony. So it's a pretty grueling experience. In both of those novels, they talk about the escape, but it also tells about their early life leading up to the escape. So there's a lot more than just there's an escape story, but there's also a lot about growing up too. So that's a little bit about that. But if you have any other questions about Henry Brown, Ellen Craft, or anything else about Elizabeth, some excellent questions. Well, this was great. You great audience, and
Thank you.
One last thing I should say, and my oddball book back there is called The Puzzle People, and it's about the Berlin Wall. And kind of the premise on that one is that when the wall was coming down in 1980, I'm kind of fixated in the 1800s, 1989, when the wall was coming down, the secret police in East Germany, the Stasi, started shredding documents like crazy because they'd been spying on their own people all this time, and they wanted to destroy the evidence. So when Germany reunified, there were 16,000 sacks of shredded documents. And that was only like 5% of the files that they destroyed. Well, what Germany decided to do, they put people in rooms and put those together like jigsaw puzzles. So the premise of The Puzzle People is you've got two people in the year 2003 putting it together, and then it flashes back to the past in 1961 and 1989, and it follows two couples who got split apart when the wall went up in 1961. And it's sort of a murder mystery, historical murder mystery. So that's but it's about freedom, so all the novels have that link of the theme of freedom, even though that one's in the 1900s. So unless there's any other questions,
I'd say thanks, everybody.
thank you very
for
much.
Coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Just remember, we have meetings first Wednesday of every month, 10 months of the year.
Where is he?
We cover all kinds of interesting things about the Civil War era, so if anybody wants to come and visit us, it doesn't cost you anything to visit.
That's the Kankakee Valley, is what
That's
Kankakee
the
Valley,
Kankakee Valley
Civil War Roundtable, right?
Roundtable.
So it's the first Wednesday of every month?
Yes.
Because I just joined the Champaign County Civil War Roundtable. I should have probably done it when I was working on the Lincoln League, but I am working on a new novel on the second year of the Civil War. So I did just join the Champaign Civil War Roundtable. Well, thank you again, and I'll be at the back if anyone had any other questions or wanted to look at the books.